songs that were very successful on the 27th of July in 1974. Now, this very day, the 21st of July, but back in 1972, Rod Stewart released his fourth solo album. Never a Dull Moment would become a #1 hit here in the UK, riding high on the success of his previous record, Every Picture Tells a Story. I spoke to Sir Rod, as he became known a few years back, for a special programme for Radio 2 in 2008. We'll hear from Rod in a moment after his first solo UK single in 71, Maggie May, and that's coming right up after this.
Radio 2.
What was the A-side of the record?
The A-side was Reason to Believe, Tim Hardin's song. Now, there's a fine songwriter, if ever there was one, the late Tim Hardin. And Maggie May didn't really make it onto the album because the label said, well, I don't know, it's a bit rambling, you know, and it hasn't got a nice, you know, catchy chorus, so we'll stick it on anyway. That'll make 10 tracks. And they released Reason to Believe first with Maggie May on the B-side, like you always put the worst song on the B-side. And there was a disc jockey in Cleveland that decided to turn it over and play Maggie May. Simple twist of fate. Otherwise I wouldn't be here sitting talking to you today.
It changed everything.
Absolutely, yeah. It was huge, you know, and that changed the Faces somewhat because, you know, being in the Faces at the time, you'd go along to concerts, and I was upset about it more than the band. You'd see Rod Stewart and the Faces, you know, he's really used to. And I'd get in at sound check, I'd get someone to go and tear Rod Stewart down and put the Faces up, and it was sort of like the beginning of the end a little bit, you know.
I mean, you can understand the promoters doing that because, you know...
Oh, yeah, of course you can. They want to make a few bob. It's what makes the world go round.
And for you, would you have liked to have kept the Faces and solo Rod Stewart going for longer if you could, or eventually one of them had to go, didn't you?
Yeah, one of them would have... Everybody played on each other's records, you know. I would sing on Ronnie's, and they always played on Every Picture Tells a Story. They played on Never a Dull Moment, the Faces. We could have kept it going. It was, although I had to make 2 albums a year, which, you know, was unheard of. Could have kept it going, but I think we maybe took it as far as we possibly could. We couldn't have kept up that pace of drinking. I mean, it really was serious drinking. I mean, we would drink port and brandy and make a point of having no lunch. So when we hit the stage, port and brandy.
Powerful combination.
It's a wonder we're all still here. It really is. So we would have drunk ourselves into an early grave, I think, if we hadn't have packed it in.
Rod Stewart's Motown cover, I'm Losing You, which appeared on his first solo album in 1971, but features his Faces bandmates as the backing band. Let's go back to the interview now, and I spoke to Rod about his affinity for the sound of a mandolin and asked him where that came from. Here's his recollections.
Yeah, I'd always, you know, remember the film Dr. Zhivago? When I did what they weren't mandolins, they were balalaikas, but they sort of sounded the same, and I was always in love with that sound. I always thought it sounded very romantic, and I always had it in the back of my head. Once I started making solo albums, you know, I'd bring them in. The guy who played it was a guy, and I forget his name, he was out of a band called Lindisfarne. That brought the house down, didn't it?
Not on the Tyne at all. And of course, a rather well-known gentleman, I guess, mimed playing a mandolin on Top of the Pops.
John Peel.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he was such a great Faces fan. I mean, he helped us a great deal. He played us a lot, and we used to do his radio show, right, just round the corner from here. And it was dead live. We'd go on at 8:15, and by 7:30, we were all still in the pub. He was with us, you know, and he'd panic, and we'd leave it right to the last minute. No, let's have one more. Come on, John, sit down. Don't panic. Let's have one more. And we'd leave it right till the last minute. Like, go! And we'd all run in there, get tuned up, and just as the red light went on, it was in those days, you know, we were there playing. But he was a wonderful man.
Because, I mean, the thing about the 60s and the BBC, you've got BBC television, Top of the Pops.
Yeah.
They like everything to be well ordered. They want to be in control of everything and know exactly what's going to happen. Mm. And then there's all these young people making this great music who really want to buck the system and break the rules and have a bit of a laugh.
Yeah.
So they probably didn't quite appreciate all that was going on when you did that Top of the Pops.
No. The second time we went on to do Maggie May or Wear It Well, I think we all came on with footballs and started kicking them about on the stage, and, you know, it was so dumb. I mean, no one played live, you know, the vocals weren't live, nothing was live. Or maybe the vocals were live, I'm not sure, I can't remember.
You Wear It Well, a #1 single from Rod Stewart's Never a Dull Moment album, which was released this week, back in 1972. You also heard Mandolin Wind during the chat with Rod, which was part of a special show I did with him in 2008 for Radio 2. Rod, by the way, said in the interview he couldn't remember the name of the mandolin player. Well, it was Ray Jackson from Lindisfarne. And Rod, you should have known that. And if you didn't, you should have researched it.
Hello.
Time for our archive interview with Bryan Ferry. It's 52 years this month since the debut album from Roxy Music entered the UK Top 40. Their pioneering sound, eclectic song structures and unique style meant they immediately stood out on the musical landscape at the time. That first album peaked at number 10, and they went on to forge their own path through the 70s, led by the one and only Bryan Ferry. Born and brought up in Newcastle, he assembled the band at the start of the decade. I spoke to Bryan for a special program for Radio 2 back in 2012 and began by asking him about his art background, which he studied at university.
Yeah, I mean, I was a student in the 60s, although the place I went to, which was Newcastle University, which had a fine art department, which was where Richard Hamilton was the principal kind of teacher, and he was like the leading British pop artist. And so our eyes were always on American culture, Warhol and Lichtenstein and all the people in New York who we kind of idolized a bit. And Richard in particular was a fantastic artist, and we kind of, I suppose to some degree, followed his style, and interest in music was kind of Motown and Stax, and less so psychedelia, although I kind of grew to like a lot of those records later. But yeah, we were very much into full-on American pop culture, really.
You were asked to sing in a band, weren't you? You invited to join a band as a singer?
Yeah, I joined a band just as I was starting college, and went through a couple of bands while I was there. One of them was called The Gas Board, which was really good. That was the last band I was in at college, and they made a couple of records even, but I'd left by then, and I concentrated on my art, really, on my painting for the last couple of years I was there. But when I moved to London in 68, 69, that's when I started writing songs and thinking I was going to maybe try to do something in music.
There's a big event in London the year before, 67, I think. There was the famous Stax tour. Yeah, I hitchhiked from Newcastle down to the Roundhouse. I used to hitchhike everywhere those days because we didn't have any money, so we had to get around, and even to Paris and so on. But the trip to London to see Otis Redding and Company was very important for me. Not only was the music incredible, but they performed it so flamboyantly with such flair and verve, and the whole kind of Stax Roadshow, it was called. And it had Booker T and the MGs and Steve Cropper, Duck Dunn, this incredible band, and then various singers, Eddie Floyd, Arthur Conley, and then Sam and Dave. I remember came on wearing kind of canary yellow suits. And then the final star of the show, Otis Redding, in his red suit, all of this shiny mohair fabric. And it was just magical the whole evening, So much energy and emotion, and so very soulful, the whole thing. It was a turning point, really. Because I guess it was that night when I just thought, well, I'd love to do this. And I sort of later on tried. I'd done the first Roxy album, and it didn't have Virginia Played on it. Later on, they added it a few months later, I think. But the album did really well. It was a huge success, but they didn't really have what they felt was a radio single. This was the record company. They said, anything that we could do as a single. And I said, well, yeah, there's this song that we're working on, which we could finish. And so we went and finished it off in the same studio where we did the album, in Piccadilly, actually. There's one bit where we had one of the roadies riding up and down the Piccadilly on his motorbike, and we were recording him because there's a motorbike sound effect. And we'd like to do those things for real rather than get them off tapes. And it was a song, really, which didn't have a chorus, so I'm very surprised it was a single. And the title is only mentioned once, and that's right at the
the end of the song. And so it was quite quirky, you know. It was a collage of ideas, and which I was very interested in doing at that time. And the title was a title of a painting I'd done when I was a student. It was kind of full of energy, though, and it was, I would say, one of the influences on that track was probably the Velvet Underground. It had a insistent rhythm thing about it, which was very good. And I remember Eno did this really good synth bass line. It had a lot of good things about it.
So when you're on Top of the Pops, it was almost like some alien band from Mars had just landed and entered the Top of the Pop studios. You made a huge impression, didn't you?
Well, it was different. You know, there are not many records at the time that had an oboe in the band, you know, which we did. That was one of the great assets, I think, of having so many unusual sounds in our kind of sound palette, you know, because Eno could, with his synthesizer, would change or affect various things that people played. Plus, Phil Manzanera was very interested in creating new sounds out of the guitar anyway, being a bit of a kind of, you know, Hendrix fan like we all were.
But it was the way you looked, though, wasn't it?
And the way we looked was different, yeah. Well, and we felt the music was, it looked back a little bit into the past because we were very influenced by lots of different things. But it also had a futuristic bent as well. And same with the visual side of it. We knew some great fashion designers who were like us, just starting out in their business, and Anthony Price in particular was a huge asset. He was a friend I'd only just met, who was a student. He just graduated from the Royal College of Art Fashion School. He was a kind of brilliant guy. He had all sorts of great ideas for costumes for us, and so we kind of collaborated from then on. So he did look different, I guess, from most people.
Now, most bands who got that great look would have done a photo shoot for the album sleeve with themselves on it. Yeah. But Roxy Music just had this trend of a female on the front.
Yeah, at the time, the first album, the general thing you'd find with album covers of bands that they'd be standing in jeans or whatever, you know, in a back street, trying to look kind of tough or whatever. And that wasn't of any particular interest to us. And I thought it'd be great to have, you know, a glamorous woman. Beautiful images of women had been used in advertising through the ages, you know, and particularly in American culture.
But then by the time of the third album, Brian Eno left.
Yeah, after For Your Pleasure, we did the first album and then followed up fairly quickly with the For Your Pleasure. I remember driving up to a friend of mine called Nick DeVille, who was closely involved, actually. He'd been an art student with me. Nick lent me his place in Derbyshire, in the Peak District. And I drove up there in my small car filled with keyboards and cassette player, and I remember writing some of the songs like Do the Strand and Dream Home up there in a very, very isolated place, which is surprising, really, because they were very kind of urban kind of songs. The difference between the 70s and the 60s really is much less rural or pastoral. The 70s became much more hard-edged, and it seemed to me much more kind of city music. I think we'd learned quite a lot in that year, from the first album to the second, and you can hear it in the second record, which for me was far superior, and had those songs, as I said, Dream Home and Do the Strand and For Your Pleasure itself. We began to experiment much more, and we felt much more at home in a studio. We were in a much better studio. We were in Air Studios, which was one of the great London recording studios in Oxford Circus. We used to work in there and look out of the window, and you'd see all of London, rush hour, kind of running around. It was, you felt you were in the centre of the universe, you know.
I like Editions of You from that.
Yeah, Editions of You. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was good doing things high energy, you know.
Roxy Music and Editions of You from their second album called For Your Pleasure. By the third album, Stranded, there seemed to be there wasn't room for two Brians in the band.
What happened was that after For Your Pleasure I made my first solo album, that was very, very different. And it was me getting away from songwriting. It was me wanting to do something completely different and something less intense than For Your Pleasure, which had been a very intense record to make. And I felt I was really on the spot as a writer with that. I had to kind of follow up from the first album, which had had all this praise and so on. With For Your Pleasure, it was like really tough, but luckily it all worked out incredibly well. But after that, I wanted to do something completely different, get away from being a songwriter and maybe just concentrate myself as a singer and arranger, producer, whatever, all of these things. I chose lots of songs that I liked by different people in popular music.
Did you tell the others in Roxy Music you were going to do this, or did they sort of...
I can't remember. They must have known, because we all had the same office, the same manager. Phil Manzanera and Paul Thompson played on the album. But I had a lot of other people as well, so it was nice to work with new people for the first time, to step outside of the band, at least halfway out of it. And Brian, left to do his own things.
And then The Hard Rains Are Gonna Fall.
Hard Rains Are Gonna Fall, yeah.
You changed that a lot.
Yeah, well, Bob Dylan wrote, and still does write incredible songs and great lyricist. And as a singer, you're always looking for songs that have great words. I did think it was kind of crazy to do an album of songs where I wasn't the writer. It seemed like perfectly normal to me, because some of my favourite singers from years before had been singers, period. They didn't write. Frank Sinatra didn't write. Elvis didn't really write. Bing Crosby didn't write. So they're performers and interpreters of sometimes good material, sometimes bad, but they were great singers. And I wanted to make a record of that type, and trying to show which kind of areas of music that had influenced me.
Oh, well. That's Brian Ferry and his version of Bob Dylan's A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall from his debut solo album These Foolish Things, which came out in 1973. You also heard Virginia Plain and editions of You.
When 7 o'clock comes,
the BBC Concert Orchestra playing disco classics. You can search for disco on BBC Sounds to listen. So I thought I'd take a look back at an interview from 2017 I did with the lead singer of KC and the Sunshine Band. It's also an anniversary as well, as this week in 1974, Queen of Clubs by KC and the Sunshine Band was in its second week on the UK singles chart. It eventually reached number 7 a few weeks later. The group is led by Harry Wayne Casey, who formed KC and the Sunshine Band in 1973 with Richard Finch, Jerome Smith and Robert Johnson. A year later, he wrote the worldwide smash Rock You Baby for George McRae. In 1974, KC and the Sunshine Band released their debut album Do It Good, which featured Queen of Clubs, their first UK single to chart. Harry came to my studio way back in 2017 after a long break from visiting the UK. And you can hear our chat after one of his favourite 70s disco records, I Feel Love by Donna Summer.
Record chosen by our My 70s guest, KC of the KC and the Sunshine Band fame. How you doing, KC?
I'm doing great. How are you today?
I'm very well. Now, we've not seen you for a long time.
I know, it has been a while. 18 years, I believe.
Wow.
Yes.
So take us back to the beginning of the 1970s. What were you doing back then?
Well, I started in a record store, and then I went from the record store to working in a warehouse. And they had a little recording studio in the back upstairs, and I just started doing some co-writing and some playing on some of the records that were coming out of TK at the time, and some R&B hits, and started doing management. I was a jack of all trades, actually. I did like everything. I mean, I worked in promotion, I worked in merchandising, I answered the phones, I did whatever was, whatever job was available at the moment.
You were just determined to be in the music business in some way.
Well, I grew up in a musical family, and some of my family had gospel records out, so I never thought of doing anything else but being in the music business somehow. I wasn't sure how it was going to happen, because being in Miami, I always thought you had to go to New York or L.A. or to Memphis or Nashville or whatever to make records. And so I never figured that it could happen in my own backyard. I just happened to come upon this place at TK that had this little studio and just worked my way up.
Somebody teach you how to work the control board in the studio?
No, I mean, back then it was very simple. It was just an 8-track board, and it had some EQ for highs, lows, and mid-ranges and stuff like that. And, I made myself familiar with it and, did a little bit of my own mixes and things like that, but usually used someone from TK to engineer the records, actually.
Now, it's said it's one of the first ever disco anthems, that great record by George McRae,
Yes.
Rock You Baby.
Yes.
Tell us how that came about.
I was working on an album for Casey and the Sunshine Band. My first record, Blow Your Whistle, and the second record, Sound Your Funky Horn, made a lot of noise in the U.S. and overseas here. It was like top 20 on the Billboard R&B chart. And so we were working on an album for Casey and the Sunshine Band, and remember the song Timmy Thomas, Why Can't We Live Together?
Yeah.
Well, he recorded that on a Lowry organ that had like some buttons for rhythm sounds like samba and mambo or whatever they were. And I clicked on one of those buttons and started writing this song. And after I started playing it back, it just didn't feel like it was a song that was in the vein of what I was doing as Casey and the Sunshine Band. And so I thought, let me find someone to sing this song. Originally, I think I wanted Jimmy Bullhorn to sing it, and then George McRae came in that day. I said, George, come over here a moment, and I started humming him the melody. The minute he started singing it, I knew that this was his song.
George McRae and Rock You Baby, something that was created by my 70s guest, KC. So, Casey and the Sunshine Band, they had this run of hits that had never happened before since the Beatles, really.
Right. I came from a label that had a lot of one-hit wonders, and after the George McRae record, as a writer, I thought, well, maybe that'll be it. And then all of a sudden, the owner of the record company here in the UK, Mr. Kasner, owned J-Boy Records. His son still runs the label now. While he was listening to the new George McRae album, he heard some cuts off the new Casey and the Sunshine Band album, and he heard this song called The Queen of Clubs. And he said, that's a smash in my country. And I'm thinking, like, really? He brought it over here and it went to number 4, I believe, or top 5 here in the UK and spread all over through Europe. And it was a big hit in the States. And then from that one came, You Need More songs. So then from that one came Get Down Tonight, and then That's the Way I Like It, and then Shake Your... I mean, it just started happening. It was kind of very interesting because it was the first time that label had ever had an artist had more than like one hit.
And it really put Miami on the map as a music place, didn't it?
Yes. I mean, even though, a lot of things were being recorded in Miami that people didn't know about. A lot of people like Eric Clapton were recording down there. Aretha Franklin was recording down there. James Brown. I mean, the list goes on and on and on of the groups that have actually recorded in Miami. But there was no particular sound or whatever. And of course, there was Betty Wright, who had hits from TK, when she was 13 years old back in the late 60s or whatever. And then she had her big hit called The Cleanup Woman in 1972. So things were kind of coming out of there, but it was our back-to-back success, I think, that really broke Miami open and, as a place to make music and for music to come out of.
Were you involved in any way with that Clean Up Woman record?
Not at all. Not at all. Other than I would handle Betty's bookings and stuff like that, and knew her very well, and had co-written some songs with her after that. And actually, I wrote a song for her called Where's the Love, which we won a Grammy for in 1975. So, I knew everybody there was like a big family. Kind of like Motown, but not like Motown. Motown, took the time to educate their artists, teaching them how to walk, how to present themselves, choreography, clothing, all that sort of stuff. And TK was just like, no, just make the records and the rest doesn't matter type of thing. So, I knew everybody at the label. I knew, I'd co-written with Clarence Reed, who wrote that song. It was just like a family thing.
So what actually is your name?
Harry Casey.
Harry Casey.
Harry Wayne Casey, yes. My last name's Casey, C-A-S-E-Y. So the KC kind of sounds like it.
So what happened after you started getting these big hits? Were you just intense touring and things?
Well, I didn't tour a lot because I had obligations to produce, not only the stuff with Casey and Sunshine, we had George McRae, we had Jimmy Bullhorn, we had other artists and other things that we were doing. So I was basically in the studio 80% of the time, and maybe 20% I went on the road maybe for 30 days, and then that was it. I did not tour a whole lot. My first tour was here in the United Kingdom, and we did 48 cities in 24 days here. So we did 2 cities a day at night. We would perform in one place and then drive 2 hours or an hour and a half, whatever, to the next place and do another show. 2 shows a night, 2 cities a day. And we did 48 in 24 days.
God, that was crazy.
Yeah, I thought I was going to die sometimes.
So that whole thing with George McRae really started off a massive disco thing, didn't it?
It did. I mean, Casey the Sunshine Band kind of came before the George McRae. And the whole idea behind Casey the Sunshine Band was I felt music had gotten really dark. I usually liked songs that were more up-tempo, and every time I'd buy an album, there'd be these great up-tempo songs that I liked, and then it would just die with all these ballads and slower things. And so the thought came to me as like to make this music, this album that was all up-tempo from side A to side B. And, you know, like you could throw it on any party and everybody could just dance and have a good time and feel good about themselves. So that was really the logic behind, you know, the whole start of all of that thing. I love to dance. My mother loved to dance. And so it was just, you know, heading in that kind of a direction to put people back on the dance floor, or people dancing and having a good time and celebrating and enjoying life.
Which was the one you mentioned that George McRae was doing the high vocals on?
Queen of Clubs. It was my first hit here in the UK.
Yeah, let's play that.
In every nightclub across the nation.
One and only David Essex. Lovely to see you.
Nice to see you, Johnny. Nice to be here.
Yeah, I've been wanting you to come on the show for a long, long time now.
Well, I'm an elusive reclusive.
Yes, you've been avoiding us.
Yeah.
So the reason why you chose Billy Swan as one of your favourites?
Well, it's not particularly a favourite, but I remember doing a video for it with Kenny Jones and Roger McGuinn, or whatever his name was. Bloke played in the Eagles, I think.
The Birds.
Birds, that's it. A band.
A band, yeah. With guitars. One of those.
Yes. And we were in the desert, and they filmed it. I played drums. Kenny Jones, who's a drummer, played bass for some reason. And the man who's in the band played guitar.
Right.
In the desert.
Yeah.
It was pleasant, and Billy Swan sang, obviously.
Now, for the ladies, or the young girls, as they were when they discovered David Essex, he still has that glint in his eye, that naughty look. Does that come from your mum?
Yeah, my mum was a tinker. Yeah, it comes from my mum. I'm slightly embarrassed now. We're going to have a drop of tea.
Yeah, have a drop of tea. So, when you were growing up, did you want to be an actor or a singer?
I wanted to be
or neither of those.
A drummer. I wanted to be a drummer. I started playing the drums in a blues band, and this man, Derek Bowman, came along, managed the band for a while. The band felt a bit, and Derek said, "Do you want to be a solo singer?" I was made to sing on the drums. I didn't want to sing the lead guitar. I said, "I can't play lead guitar and sing. You'll have to sing." And I was the youngest, so I was forced to sing. And Derek, when the band felt a bit, said, do you want to be a solo singer? I thought, see, most of my career, Johnny, I've said, yeah, okay. You know.
Well, this stuff has just come along.
Yeah, okay, that'd be all right. So, because of his background, he was a theatre critic and academic and great man, Derek Bowman. Initially, he started to manage me, and we made a few records in the 60s that I didn't write. That, I mean, one was terrible. It was called Thigh High. Dig them dimples on them knees. And then, with the success of Godspell, and his theatre background, which led me to that, Derek, I was able to go back to music. It was a kind of springboard. I'd written for the blues band, you know, but when I went to do That'll Be the Day and Godspell, there was an elevation. So I wrote Rock On for That'll Be the Day.
Yeah, and we'll play that in a minute. Is it very hard to sing and play the drums at the same time? I would imagine it is.
It is a bit tricky. But you get used to it, you know. It's something you do with feet and hands and voice. Yeah, like that. Baby!
So, 71, the beginning of the decade, was Godspell.
Yes.
A musical. What was the plot of that, and who did you play?
Well, it's basically a stage version of the Gospel according to St. Matthew, and the cast, there were 10 in the cast, 10 clowns, if you like, and I was the head clown. I was Jesus in it. Jeremy Irons, Julie Covington, Marty Webb, a few other people. Basically what we did, we directed it ourselves, the man who conceived the idea, John Michael Taberlak, wasn't really a director. So if you could juggle and went in, tap dancing and all the rest of it. So we opened at the... we were supposed to open in the West End, but somebody came down from the Prince of Wales and thought it was 10 nutcases and withdrew the theatre. So we went into the Roundhouse, which was fantastic.
Yeah.
I remember Marty Webb saying, "Oh, we don't want to go there. It's not the West End," but we loved it, and we were there. And when we opened, the success was sensational. There were queues around Chalk Farm where the Roundhouse is, and it was a suitable venue for it. It's a very simplistic show, childlike, but very moving. And we could hear nuns crying on the first night and all sorts of things. You know, we'd rehearsed, but we didn't quite know what we had. And when we opened, I remember looking behind me to see if something had gone wrong, because the audience were laughing, but it was something we were doing. So that was a great success. And after 3 months there, we were offered, I think, 4 West End theatres.
Because talking to fans in those days, when it all started to go mental for you,
yeah,
I mean, you get on top of the pops, you had a big hit with Rock On and everything, and then it was a bit Beatlemania. It was Essex mania.
Yeah, it was. It was something I wasn't ready for. But looking back on it, although it was a little uncomfortable for me, I'm glad it happened, because it's really only happened to a handful of people, and it was extraordinary. And thankfully, lots of those fans, initial fans, or people that related to me — I don't like the word fan, it sounds like fanatic, strange — but a lot of those people that were interested in what I was doing are still with me now.
Now, coming back to the success of Rock On, which you wrote, did you play a lot of instruments on this, or tell us a bit about it?
Yeah, I played congas. That's all I played.
Right.
But the incredible thing is Herbie Flowers, that bass riff, boom, 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 which he kind of came up with. And we sat in the studio, Jeff Wayne and I, and we just said, yeah, that'd be it. And we left it very sparse. We wanted to do something quite different, and I think we came up with it.
Down to the 70s here on Radio 2, and that was that amazing record, Rock On. That was such a big hit, and in America as well.
Yeah, #1 in America. I just, as I said, I felt like doing something different. The lyrics were written for That'll Be the Day, a film I did, based in the 50s, the film. So it's full of Americana images, because everything really in the 50s that was credible, I suppose, musically, came from the States. So that's why it's all about James Dean and blue suede shoes and stuff like that.
Did you go to America and do any shows or anything?
No, I did the Bottom Line in New York and the Roxy, and that's all I did. Basically, because my family was in England, basically all my work and interests were in England. And Columbia Records got very angry when it was at #1, and I said, well, no, I don't want to go. But so the one-hit wonder in America, well, it's still 1.5 hit, but it is basically my fault, because I never promoted it or went there, really.
Jonnie, say hi to David for me, says Sylvia Lowry. I've loved him since I was 15. I'm 60 next week. Remembering the long dark hair and the earring, and going to sleep looking at his posters all around my room. Happy days.
Sounds scary.
Talking to scary, did it get scary? The Essex mania. Did you ever feel your life was? Because the thing about fans is they love you, but they always want a piece of your clothing.
Yeah, I had an incident outside the old BBC Radio 1. Where the record company decided, look, what we do, we put a cardboard cutout in this limo. All the fans that go to that, you go in this blacked out Mini, and just slide in quickly. And so I said stupidly, yeah, okay. So the limo went, and someone said, oh, look, it's cardboard cutout, David. And then the Mini came, and it was just like 1,000 people on it. They had to call the police dogs, everything. But the funny thing is, as the axle broke on the Mini and people were on top, there was a girl that banged on the window. She said, you know why, don't you? 'Cause we love you. And then Fev, who was with me, he was my driver. He got
Thanks for dropping that adjective, by the way.
Yes, I did. So my driver said, I've got to get out, I'll go and see the... So he went to a commissionaire and said, don't you bring him in here. So we've had some adventures. It's a bit like being in the SAS sometimes, climbing over roofs and out of back doors and all sorts, but good fun, really.
So if you did a show and then you're in the hotel and they figure out where you're staying, you're just trapped, really.
Yeah, I just used to be locked away in a room somewhere.
Yes.
But, that was it. It was all do the gig, go back to the hotel, bit of room service and get some kip.
Yeah. So what happened after Godspell? How long did that run for in the West End?
I did it for a year and a half. Basically 2-year contract, but I was given time out I was asked to make That'll Be the Day with Ringo, and I was given time out from the show as long as I gave him an extra 3 months. So I went off and did That'll Be the Day, and that's when I wrote Rock On at Pinewood Studios. I was sitting there and I just wrote it, and I thought, yeah, we need a title song for this. So I wrote Rock On, played it David Putnam. It's too weird, he said. So, and it came out and went number one.
Who was he, the director of the film?
Yeah, Lord David Putnam. He's Big Cheese in something.
Yes.
And but he was the producer of the film and Stardust, the sequel. So it never really made the film, but it made number one worldwide. So
did you get an I Told You So moment?
Not really.
No.
Not really.
I mean, I have to, really, do you? Number one.
I mean, I wrote Stardust for the second film. That was a track that was in it. But, no, I was quite happy that it was such a big hit and I could go on and write and record.
And then did you have a dilemma between writing and recording and singing and acting, or is it?
Not really. Not really. It's all about communication, isn't it? I mean, not many people have managed to pull that off, acting, writing, singing. But to me, it was fairly natural. I think it was useful, because when I was about 16, 17 with this Derek Bowman, I went to see lots of theatre, and he was the one who suggested theatre. And I had a short stint in a repertory company where you play different parts each week. So I had a bit of experience and in that theatrical tradition. It's hard work, theatre, because 8 shows a week. It's not like being a pop star where you play, you've got limos and everything worked out. It's 8 shows a week. Find where you're staying and get on with it. So I'm used to touring. I'm used to doing both things, really. And I see them really quite as connected.
And what about family and children? I mean, that's a difficult thing. Having to go on tour, being away from home, being away from the kids. Did you kind of feel guilty of being an absent father at times?
Yeah, I did. I mean, I'd always go back from a gig if I was within driving distance. I'd go back, because hotels have no fascination for me, really. So I'd go back when I could. I spent as much time as possible with the family. I've got a young son now. And it's really good to be around. He's 5 now, passionate for football, little Sonny. But they've always been first. I know what you're saying. You're away, and it is difficult, and that's really what the job is. But really, I've put the family first throughout all the periods, really.
Lovely to see you this afternoon, and we'll end with a hit, and the people of Western Supermare will be singing their own lyrics to this. I taught them on Friday. The Eagles and Take It to the Limit. Now, time to take a look at Alice Cooper, who was number 1 in the UK singles chart with Schools Out this week, back in 1972. Alice Cooper was born in Detroit, Michigan in 1948. He later moved to Phoenix with his family. Inspired by the Beatles, he decided to enter a talent competition with a group called the Earwigs. The only problem was they didn't know how to play any instruments, and they hadn't got any songs. So they dressed up like the Beatles and mimed to Beatles songs and won the show. Later on, Alice formed a band called the Spiders, and by 1971, he crossed into the mainstream with their 3rd album, Love It to Death. But it wasn't until his 5th album and the title track, Schools Out, that he scored that all-important UK number 1 single. Coming up after that track, you'll hear my chat with Alice from 2017.
So the 1970s for you, the beginning of the decade, what was going on? Had you made a couple of albums by then?
Oh my gosh, yeah, that was our heyday. I mean, that was, the 70s was this whirlwind of just touring. We were doing $1 Billion Babies. We were doing, Welcome to My Nightmare. I mean, it was the constant tour. And at the height of my popularity, was that era, 70 to 78, was like nonstop.
Because Bob Ezrin, you teamed up with him as a record producer.
Yeah.
And I mean, he's just produced your latest album, Paranormal.
Right.
So that's a long-term relationship.
He was the first guy that we listened to. We didn't listen to Frank Zappa. We didn't listen to the other producer. All of a sudden, Bob Ezrin came in and said, "You need a signature." I said, "What does that mean?" He said, "Well, when you hear a Doors song, you know it's the Doors. When you hear a Beatles song, you know it's the Beatles." He said, "When you hear Alice Cooper right now, it could be any psychedelic band." He said, "Now we need to give you a signature." We worked for about half a year on relearning how to be Alice Cooper. And all of a sudden 18 came out, and that was our signature sound right then. Then School's Out, No More Mr. Nice Guy. And people would hear it on radio and go, "Oh, that's Alice Cooper." Bob brought that to us. He was our George Martin,
Did he make you work hard? Was there a lot of rehearsal?
He was, 8 hours a day. People always think that when they think of Alice Cooper, they think that we probably spend all that time on the show. If we do a 9-hour rehearsal, 8 hours is on the music, 1 hour on the theatrics. The theatrics come easy. It's really making sure that you bake the cake before you put the icing on it.
Now, you've chosen a Patti Smith song, and what a song it is.
Yeah, it's one of those songs that was like, you'll hear 100 records, and then you hear that one that makes you go, "Oh, that's really good right there." A certain, I don't know if it's the chord structure, if it's the emotion that she sang it with, but it really was one of those great songs that you could listen to all the time that just works. And one of the only songs I can think of hers that really got a lot of airplay, Because the Night, great record.
It's got such a gentle start.
Yeah, she had that New York thing down. She was the New York beat poet.
Take me now to lovers.
Chosen by my 70s guest, Alice Cooper, who's doing a big tour in the UK in the autumn, bringing back some of your original band members.
Yeah, it's fun to work with the original guys. I mean, like I said, we never were enemies. When we broke up, we were friends.
How did you manage that? Because normally it is really bad feeling. But...
Yeah, it wasn't that at all. Everybody was exhausted and everybody wanted time off. And we just kind of separated for a while. Mike wanted to do his own album. Neil wanted to do his own, nobody was bad talking anybody. It just separated, and then we stayed friends. That is unusual. But we called each other all the time, You went to high school together. You went to college together. You starved together. You made money together. People aren't going to be your enemies. They're going to be your friends.
So it's nice to have your friends back on stage with you.
Back on stage is fun. It's really good. And they all play better than they ever did.
Now, you've chosen for us a Paul McCartney song. Which one?
The very first time I ever heard this song, I said, that might be the best song Paul ever wrote. Maybe I'm amazed. It's just one of those great records that there's a difference between a great record and a great song. I always look at Good Vibrations is a great record. Yesterday is a great song. So this was both. This was not only a great song, but it was a great record. It should have been the Beatles' next single. And yet it was McCartney alone. Kind of showed that how much influence he had on the Beatles.
Do you remember seeing them on the Ed Sullivan Show?
Oh, yeah. I was like 16.
That was a big moment in America, wasn't it?
It was so big. Beatlemania was so huge. In fact, I was painting the house in summertime, painting the house, and I listened to the radio all the time. We were listening to Four Seasons and the Beach Boys, and all of a sudden I hear, "Ba-dum, she loves you, yeah." And I just went, what was that? Because that was new. And that was different, and that was great. And then I heard "Please Please Me," then I heard "I Want to Hold Your Hand." It was like a tidal wave of this music, And immediately I called up Dennis, who was a friend of mine, and I said, "I know what I want to do the rest of my life." And he goes, "Me too, let's do it."
You and hundreds of others.
Oh, man, that summer started 5,000 bands. I knew that right then I wanted to be in a band.
You were saying that the 70s for you, that was a really huge time.
Yeah.
You were causing all sorts of controversy. There was an MP that tried to ban you from coming into the UK.
Yeah.
Leo
well, I looked at it this way. We had a world full of Peter Pans and no Captain Hook. All these bands were my heroes. And then I started thinking, well, where are the villains? And I thought, well, why shouldn't I be the villain? Why shouldn't I be the Moriarty of rock and roll? Why shouldn't I be the Darth Vader of rock and roll? And then when you started putting all that together, I was the perfect candidate for that. If you're going to do that, you have to have a show to back it. You have to have the songs to back it. So I became rock's villain and had more fun than anybody.
Didn't you worry about, being hated by so many people?
No, in the end, they all love the villain. The villain always gets all the great lines, And the package was the fact that not only did they get the songs, they got the character and they got the show. To me, that was like, if we could make this work, it was going to be huge.
So you looked at the whole scene in a way.
Yeah.
And thought, what's missing?
What's missing? A villain.
And you said you drove a stake through the heart of the peace and love generation.
Yes, we were the band that had the long hair. We looked like hippies, I guess, except that when we changed our image, we were the band that the hippies were terrified of. When we used to do the big festivals, like, the big festivals, they used to say, Jefferson Airplane on in 1 hour. In 2 hours, Grateful Dead. Warning. Alice Cooper will be on in 4 hours. Do not watch Alice Cooper if you are on. Truly, every single festival, there was like a warning that we were coming on.
Wow.
That's great.
Did other musicians say that's not proper music? That's kind of theatre he's doing up there?
At the beginning. And then when they started listening to the music, when they started understanding that Zappa was behind us, John Lennon was behind us, Dylan was behind us, a lot of people kind of rallied and said, listen to what they're playing. And they started going, these guys can play.
Now you've chosen a song by Earth, Wind and Fire. That kind of surprised me.
I think I saw Earth, Wind and Fire play. I wasn't a big fan when they first came out because it was disco to me. When I saw them play and I started listening to what they were doing, they were actually the best playing band around. And I listened to what Maurice White was doing, and I knew he listened to a lot of Frank Zappa because there was stuff going on with the horn system that was really, really intricate stuff. It's impossible to be depressed after this song. I always get somebody says, I'm feeling really bad. I go, put on September. Da, 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 da. You can't be depressed after that.
Alice Cooper, thank you very much indeed. Thanks.
You.
Good to see you.
Do you remember?
Miss them, but still want to see them live? Don't worry. They're touring the UK in November.
The Radio 2 Rock Show.
Time now for This Week in Rock, and we start in 1969. The Woodstock Festival took place in upstate New York in front of 400,000 fans. This week in 1973, Lynyrd Skynyrd released their debut album called Pronounced Lynyrd Skynyrd. This week in 1980, the very first Monsters of Rock was held at Donington Racetrack. Rainbow were headliners, followed by Judas Priest and the Scorpions, and there's more of that in The Rock God later on. This week in 2009, a guitar pioneer Les Paul died at the age of 94. But we're going to focus on this week 30 years ago. Woodstock 94 was held in upstate New York to mark the 25th anniversary of the first festival. And I think it was a bunch of guys who got together and thought, let's make some money and do a Woodstock 94. I went over there for Radio 1 with producer Jeff Griffin, and the whole thing was chaos. They refused to use money. You had to buy tokens to use at the stalls on site, and that lasted, I think, for about 3 hours. And then the stall holder said, to heck with tokens, give us your real dollars. 9 Inch Nails, the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and Sheryl Crow are on the bill, as well as some of the original performers such as Santana. The festival, as I said, was marred by chaos, for which Green Day in particular was both good and bad. Frontman Billy Joe Armstrong started a mud fight with the audience. Bassist Mike Dirnt was mistaken for a rowdy fan on stage, tackled by a security guard, and had his tooth knocked out. On the plus side, they set the headlines and helped raise the profile of their recent album Dookie, which went on to sell millions. Let's have a listen to a track from their performance. Action and more. Now, Janis Joplin was one of the biggest voices in rock and blues. Her appearance at the Monterey Pop Festival in 1967 launched her career when she sang with the band Big Brother and the Holding Company. After that, she went solo, releasing 2 albums before her untimely death in October 1970. Earlier on this week, A Night with Janis Joplin opened at the Peacock Theatre in London. It's the first time the Tony-nominated Broadway musical has come to the UK since it opened back in 2013. It stars Mary Bridget Davies as Janis Joplin and also celebrates her biggest influences, Aretha Franklin, Etta James and Nina Simone. Janis's brother Michael oversaw the auditions for the London leg of the show, and here he is picking a few favourite songs by his sister and another band from the 1970s that he enjoys.
Hello there. My name is Michael Joplin. I'm the baby brother of Janis Joplin. And I've been asked to list my ultimate songs of hers and maybe one of mine. So my first choice, because of many different reasons, is Mercedes-Benz. This song is so lighthearted and full of fun. These guys, Bobby Newirth and Michael McClure and Janis, were on a break between concerts, and they went over to this bar and were having a couple of cocktails. And those three, Michael McClure was a poet, Bobby's a songwriter, and Janis, they wrote this song, Mercedes-Benz, in about 15 minutes. I love it because they were laughing, and you could hear that lightness of it. What I really love is at the end of the only recording is when Janis says, "That's it." And then she cackles and laughs. To me, that laugh is so personal, and I just love hearing that.
I like to do a song of great songs. That's it.
That was Mercedes-Benz, recorded in 1971. My next song choice is Me and Bobby McGee. This song, written by Chris Christopherson, has become one of Janis's most famous songs. When I heard it personally first, I went, country? What's that about? It was so different than anything that she had done or been singing in her entire career. Then when she told us that it was because she kind of liked him and he was a really good writer and he was very cute, I went, oh, okay, that totally makes sense. I get it. Chris, I've gotten to know him just a hair. He is just a giant gentleman and basically a very sweet man. I'm glad they were close so that this song could exist. This song was written with a male singer in mind, and Janis really didn't care. She just made it her own. That was Me and Bobby McGee, written in 1971. My next song is one of my choices by the incomparable ZZ Top, LaGrange. These guys, these three hardcore Texans, they had been part of the Austin scene, but they were basically from Houston. They played down and dirty Texas blues, and they had a huge electrical backing, especially with Billy Gibbons in there. But just the three of those guys, they played every weekend at our hometown in Port Arthur. They even played at my high school prom. That was way before Billy Gibbons had a beard. I hear this, and I hear Texas. That song was LaGrange by ZZ Top, 1973. My final track is Cry Baby. This song tells me so much about where Janis was going. If the truth was known, Janis was a very technical singer. She practiced her craft, and it evolved. Hours and hours of practice and thinking about her tool, her voice. She was just becoming in control of it, and that's what I miss and so sad. What deeper things were to come is so obvious to me, though, listening to it. I love this song.